mosquitoes are so attracted to me. So I'm just like, every time now I see, I'm like, you're just gonna shorten my life by 3 seconds, right? And it was like for a whole week, I was just like wearing a brace and everything. So I feel like not really a spring chicken anymore. So enjoying my last few years of youth.
There you go.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Dog Mom Podcast. Today we have another very special guest. I know I say that every single week, but today we have Dr. Kevin Toman, who has been a veterinarian for 40 years. And the last 15 specifically, he's been interested in pet longevity. So thank you so much, Dr. Kevin, for being on the show, and welcome to Dog Mom Podcast.
You bet, Jen. Thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here. You do such a great job with your podcast, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's kind of like my little side creativity project, and it helps me improve my public speaking, and so all good. So, Dr. Kevin, with 40 years of experience in veterinary medicine, what initially drew you to the field?
You know, I'm one of those souls, for better or for worse, that can honestly say, Jen, that it was the only thing I ever wanted to do. I can remember having a very tolerant grandmother as I tried to bandage her dog back at the age of 5 or 6. And so, I had kind of tunnel vision and went through college and veterinary school, just knowing that was the only thing I ever wanted to do in my life.
And you stuck with it. You didn't go to school and you're like, oh, let me try this or let me try that. You just tunnel vision all the way through.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I kind of regret in some ways, to be honest with you. So if you have young listeners, let them learn from my mistake, because I wish that I had taken more time to kind of dabble in other courses along the way, because I did have that tunnel vision that you described. But I look back on college as the very best time of my life. And at some point I might yet go back and take some of those classes.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And for me as well, like I definitely have tunnel vision as well. So I started ZippyPaws when I graduated college, and we're coming up on 15 years next year, and I haven't really done anything else. I mean, I've had other like internships in the meantime, but haven't really had another job. I've never had like a real boss. So I don't intend on getting one, but maybe we'll tunnel vision for 40 years.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you so much. And was there a moment where you specifically wanted to focus on senior pets and helping those pets?
Well, there were a couple things that prompted this component of my journey. One was the fact that I had a Bernese mountain dog named McGregor, and he was the love of my life back when. And I ended up losing him, as is common with Berners, to a brain tumor. And that was very frustrating to me, Jen, because I just simply was powerless at that point in time. And then about 5 years later, I actually went through a little bit of a health scare where I was wrongly, thankfully, diagnosed with a form of cancer. And I went through all the hoops at the Mayo Clinic, which is and that's, by the way, a place that I would strongly recommend. But at the end of the day, it was ironic that the thing that they told me was that no medicine would prevent this little pre-malignant condition I have from progressing, but ironically, an herbal medicine would. And so that was the start of my interest in integrative therapy and how to best help these older pets under my care. And so let me just take a moment to describe that for you, because realistically, I think that veterinarians quite commonly just use the medications that are suggested. But I think, as with older humans, I'm 65 and this resonates a little bit more with me now, but by using a combination of nutrition and traditional medication, but also integrative therapy and laser therapy and acupuncture, I think there are a lot of different ways that you and I can work together to improve the lifestyle of an older pet. And that's what I've tried to do for about the last 15 years.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And, I'm glad you reached out to me, because as we talked before, and as some of our listeners know, I do have a senior dog, Kramer, who is 16 and a half now. So he's really, lived a long, healthy, and just vibrant life. And near the end of his life now, there's a lot of health issues that pop up. I mean, not in terms that he's sick, but just his joints are not doing as well. I mean, to be expected at 16 and a half. So I'm just really interested to ask you some more questions today and hear more about your techniques to helping senior dogs. And
Fire away.
yeah, and when you talk about senior dogs, is there like a certain age number that you consider a dog to be senior, or does it vary by breed size?
It really does, Jen. You're exactly right. And so an 8-year-old miniature pinscher, for instance, is vastly younger than that 8-year-old Bernese Mountain Dog of mine, McGregor, or a Labrador or a Golden Retriever. And so in general terms, I'm going to say that for small to medium-sized dogs, I look at that 8-year mark as kind of a cutoff. But if you're talking about a retriever breed or anything larger than that, I think we ought to start having these longevity-centered conversations by the time a dog turns 5 or 6.
Oh, really? Wow, that's early.
Mhm.
I guess we don't really think, I guess, 5 or 6 is like the start of preparing for that senior life.
I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of functional health on the human side, but the reality is that I think the best way to describe it, Jen, would simply be that by doing some early testing on a repeated basis, and these are not just standard blood and urine tests, but they're
Mhm.
more comprehensive. And if you and I find signs of problems early on, there are little microscopic changes that you can make in the care of your now 16-year-old dog. Maybe he or she is running into that early joint disease, and there's a supplement that we can use, or there are types of exercise that we can avoid. And for instance, with a dog who's running into arthritis, one of the things that I mention to people all the time is that hardwood and tile floors are not their friend, because
Mm.
every time a dog slips and falls as they run around the corner, they are creating damage, permanent damage in their spine and their joints. And so the goal with this 5 or 6 or 8-year-old dog is to detect early signal, the very earliest in symptoms, so that you and I can work together, or a pet parent and I can work together to eliminate that problem rather than watch it magnify.
Right. And it's probably something that you haven't really thought of. Less small changes that you can make today, whereas, 5 years down the line, you wish you could have made those small changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because time progresses for all of us. And once a pet becomes symptomatic, once your dog or my little golden retriever puppy Annabelle down here, once they start limping, Jen, I mean, in a lot of ways, we've lost that opportunity
Mhm.
to head that off at the pass. And now we're put into a reactive stance. Whereas if you and I catch this early in the game, there are many things that we can do to prevent that from ever occurring.
Right. And it's funny that you mentioned functional health because I just gifted my husband subscription to
Oh,
Function.
function health.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and he hasn't gone to take the tests yet, but
Okay.
that's something that like I'm preparing for his senior.
Well, there you go. But you're exactly right, because the
Yeah,
same principles hold true for humans. Listen,
right.
I mean, the veterinary or the human medical profession is always going to be much better at trying to treat problems than prevent them, and that's a new thing. I mean, the goal of Function Health, for instance, is again to use these early markers so that you and I, or you and your husband, can work together via nutrition or via lifestyle or via supplements to head problems off before they occur. And the very same thing applies to our pets.
Right. And what are these kind of baseline labs or tests would you be recommending that your clients take so that we can kind of see what type of markers would you suggest?
Well, I think that every middle-aged dog, and that's really where that 8-year-old poodle or that 6-year-old retriever comes in, should have annual blood and urine tests. And that typically, the standard for us veterinarians, Jen, is just simply a complete blood count, a comprehensive chemistry profile, and a urinalysis. And that's all great because that does give us a great idea in terms of organ function, measures your bone marrow function, it looks at dehydration, et cetera. But when you and I start thinking about functional health, that's when we start looking at more detailed biomarkers of inflammation. In your husband's case, for instance, C-reactive protein will be a big one, and some of the hemoglobin measurements that could help you detect diabetes early in the game. And so realistically, the disease that you and I are most worried about are cancer, kidney disease, and heart disease. And every one of those has early markers that you and I can look at as part of a functional health blood panel.
Right. And these tests exist for dogs as well, so we can detect them in dogs.
Yes, they do. Yes,
Oh,
they
wow.
do. It's just that veterinarians don't use them very frequently. And that's where I'm a kind of evolving my practice. And we can talk more about what I'm doing now, but I'm evolving my practice to kind of that function health model, Jen, so that I can, by working together with pet parents, we can stop some of these disease processes early in their tracks.
Interesting. That's super interesting because I've only heard of this like function health in the last year or two. Me,
Mhm.
as someone who is not in the industry, has not heard of this prior. So I'm glad that it's getting more traction and widespread consumer appeal because I feel like it probably is very important and we should be trying to catch these early.
Sure. Well, you're a young girl, but at my
Yeah.
advanced age of 65, I mean, the reality is that some of these things are becoming more important to me at my age.
Yeah.
So enjoy that youth while you can.
Yeah, last week had a issue with my back and it was like for a whole week I was just like wearing a brace and everything. So I feel like not really a spring chicken anymore. So enjoying my last few years of youth.
There you go.
So in terms of diet, and I think a lot of pet parents have that's what I hear is that they're going down like the pet food aisle and they see so many different options for food like kibble, there's raw, there's freeze dried raw, there's like fresh, and they're kind of overwhelmed by all the choices. Is there anything like what is your take on all this type of different food and what is your approach to
Okay.
suggesting what pet parents do?
Well, first off, I'm going to say that there is no one ideal diet for every pet. Just like every human has different dietary preferences and needs, the same thing holds true for our dogs. But I think there's clear evidence that the kibbles that I fed my dogs for 30 or 40 years are really, in general, unhealthy for our pets. And the reason for that is twofold, Jen. First off, the kibbles themselves are typically held together with carbohydrates or starch binders. That's what is necessary to glom a kibble together. And then most of the lower to mid-price kibbles are processed with very high heat. And that brownish flavor that you and I associate a meat product is actually the high heat creates inflammation or creates inflammatory precursors so that when dogs eat kibbles, they are more prone to develop inflammation like allergies and arthritis, etc., as they age. And so I think there's clear evidence to support the use of less processed foods for both you and me, going to a farmer's market instead of buying a frozen pizza at the grocery store, and for our pets. And so I cook on a daily basis for my little golden retriever, Annabelle, and I could speak more about that if you wish. But I think that across the board, if you and I are looking for the healthiest diets for our pets, they would have a combination of meat and vegetables, of course, and the less processed they are, the better. Now, whether that be a premium pet food product like Ollie or Farmer's Dog or Just Food for Dogs, whether it be a raw product, any one of those is fine. But I think you get what you pay for, unfortunately. Now, let me make one point about raw diets, and that is that during my 40-year veterinary career, I've seen 2 dogs die from eating contaminated raw diets. In one case, a disease called E. coli, and in a second, a disease called toxoplasmosis. And so it's nothing to fool around with. And so if you are feeding your dogs a raw diet, please, the one thing I'm going to ask of you during this interview is to make sure that the diet manufacturer uses a product like high pressure pasteurization or something to get rid of the bacterial and protozoal components or contaminants of that diet. That was long-winded, wasn't it? You
Yeah.
asked me a simple
No, that was
question,
very
and
informative.
I just keep rattling on. So I apologize for that.
That is informative. Yeah, I know a lot of people that, add raw into their dog's diet, but for me, I'm just a little cautious. personally, I don't eat raw meat, so I
I
just
agree.
think I know that dogs can take it, and some breeds maybe more than others that they can accept this raw diet. But for me, I'm just a little queasy about it. So personally, I don't feed raw, but I know certain people who do add that, into their diet if it's not
Yeah.
fully. Yeah, but that is good advice.
Because as with a 16-year-old dog, one of the things you have to understand is that your dog's immune system is not what it was 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. And
Mhm.
so your dog, as an oldster, is much less able to deal with potential contaminants within their diet, or even just simply the diseases, or if he were to eat something along the street on a walk or whatever, his immune system is going to be much less able to take care of that than it would have been 5 years ago, for instance. So you're exactly right. You're wise in your assessment for him.
Yeah, and I was thinking that, some owners start their puppy on, a semi-raw diet. So then I feel like that kind of builds up their tolerance for the raw meat. And, if I just give my dog all raw ground beef tomorrow, she's gonna like throw up. So,
Probably so. So I
yeah.
apologize. I've been calling your older. What's your dog's name? Let's get
Oh,
that out of
yes.
the way.
I have 3 dogs. My
Okay.
senior dog's name is Kramer, he's a Goldendoodle, and I have a
Okay.
3-year-old Dalmatian named Pepper. I have a 6-year-old, a golden retriever named Bella.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I have quite the little clan here, so
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So let me just make one more comment, and then I'll take a step back from the whole diet part of things. But
Yeah.
when you mention, feeding, for instance, Kramer, or for that matter, Bella or Pepper, a bunch of ground meat, if you're going to develop a diet, if you're going to home cook for your dog, in general, just simply rotating meats and rotating vegetables will take care of any dietary insufficiencies. But if
Mhm.
you're going to feed just one diet longer term, one home cooked diet to your dog, then I'm asking you and your listeners to please have that diet balanced. Just send a sample, or tell a veterinary nutritionist exactly what you're feeding, so that he or she can tell you, well, you need to add a little bit of this or a sprinkle of that to make a completely balanced diet for your dog. That service typically just costs $75 or $100, and you can find it at balanceit.com. There's a number of veterinary nutritional consultants out there. But if you're feeding just one home cooked diet, please go to the trouble of having it nutritionally balanced.
Okay, got it. Yeah, you might be feeding green beans and beef and something, and you're missing, say, like iron somewhere. You're
Yep,
missing this
exactly.
type of vitamin, and you
Exactly.
just have to add a little bit of that in. Okay, good
Yeah.
to know. And you talked a little bit about inflammation, and I've kind of heard about this in like the human health world, kind of like seed oils or other
Mhm.
things that kind of spark that inflammation. Can you talk more about that and why you see dogs nowadays having more of that?
Well, I think that's a great question in both human and veterinary medicine. And probably a large part of that, you're exactly correct, is dietary. And again, I'll harken back to my discussion of kibbles that are processed at high temperature, because we know that they have a variety of pro-inflammatory products. And one of them, for instance, is advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. And we know very clearly that these set the table not only for inflammation, but also for cancer. And so what I'm going to tell you is that regardless of the source, we know that in both humans and pets, Jen, inflammation creates aging for you and me. And it does that in a number of different ways, but the most common is actually by setting the table for cancer. Now, in large breed dogs, the 2 most common forms of inflammation for large breed dogs are joint pain, that you've already mentioned with Kramer, and allergies. Whereas for
Mm.
small dogs, they run into the same allergic issues, but the most common source of inflammation for small dogs under 20 pounds is actually dental disease. And so one of the things that if you have a small dog, and you really don't, Bella and Pepper and Kramer are all good sized dogs, and neither do I. But if you have a dog that's under 20 pounds, who's approaching midlife, please take them in, have their teeth examined, and set them up for an anesthetic dental cleaning, because the only way that you and I can tell whether your dog's teeth are healthy is with dental x-rays, the same as our dentist takes for you and me. And that unfortunately requires anesthesia.
Mm. Yeah, what you mentioned is interesting because I would not necessarily associate inflammation with allergies. Can you talk more about that and how that's related? I would think like allergies are kind of like pollen or yeast or things like that. So, how does that work?
Yeah, well, yeah, and so that's exactly right. But I mean, the thing that we have to understand is that if for instance I'm allergic to a pollen, well, when I inhale that pollen, my whole immune system is going to be activated. It's not the pollen itself that creates my runny nose or my red face or a sore throat. It's my body's reaction to that pollen and the body's inflammatory response. I mean, we're supposed to keep our immune systems just as low and mellow as possible. And
Right.
if our body's immune system is triggered by allergies, for instance, then abnormal levels of cells are going to be present, abnormal levels of cell messengers are going to be present, and it really does set the table for cancer. In fact, I'll bet you've heard of Steve Jobs anyway, the originator of Apple. He ran into a problem with pancreatic cancer in past, but his physician, Jen, was a doctor down at USC named David Agus. And he's written a big, long book. And his hypothesis is that every time I, as a male, run into a cold or allergies or get a splinter under my skin, well, I'm incrementally shortening my life. And every time you, as a woman, wear a set of high heels that creates a blister, you're actually shortening your life just a little bit. So pain and swelling and itch and irritation are all signs of inflammation in our bodies. And if we can feel those, the odds are that we're subtracting a little bit from our life. Our pets are exactly the same.
Every mosquito bite I've ever gotten,
There you go.
shortening my
There you
life.
go. Yeah.
Darn it. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, I actually, my dogs are not very allergic to anything, which is great. But I do have, some of my employees have dogs that have very strong allergic reactions, and sometimes it's very difficult for them to find the source, right?
Yeah.
And maybe from what you're saying is it's not necessarily that this plant or that plant or this food is, it could be the trigger, right? But maybe the underlying factor is inflammation and something wrong with like internally, so that all these external factors can, have like this kind of flare up.
Yeah, well, certainly, just like humans. I mean, some children are more allergic than others, and some dogs are more allergic than others. And you're exactly right. When you do have allergies, Jen, by definition, there's something in your environment that is pissing your immune system off. And now I mean, for many years, you and I would have had to do a skin test on Kramer. By skin test, I mean, you clip up a section of Kramer's skin, you draw a little tic-tac-toe grid, and then into each one of those little squares, you inject a microscopic dose of this pollen or that food, and you see where the biggest bump is. And then you know that, gosh, he's allergic to that. But now we know that we're using blood tests to do much the same thing. And so if, for instance, your employee has a dog that's very allergic, you can have their veterinarian draw blood and send it off to an allergy lab, and they can tell you about 90% of the time exactly what form of weed your dog is sensitive to, or what form of pollen, or what diet your dog is sensitive to, so that you can either A, avoid it, or B, develop a hyposensitizing plan. And back in the day, we would have had to given Kramer, for instance, little microscopic and hypoallergenic injections. And now you can just put a couple of drops of an allergic serum into their mouth. And
Oh, wow.
in about 2/3 of the cases, it will solve allergies. So this is nothing to sneeze at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That seems like I haven't heard of that, but that seems like that would solve many pet parents' issues with their pets. Like they just don't know what to avoid, and if we could just get to
Right.
the source of that, then they could, their dog could have a better quality of life. I'm sure from, licking and scratching and all that with the paws that are
Absolutely.
red.
Yeah.
That's just uncomfortable.
It's
Um,
uncomfortable for us all. You
yeah.
lose a lot of sleep when you're a pet parent, and your dog, I mean, my puppy Annabelle sleeps with us. And, if she were up scratching all night long, it would ruin not just her sleep, but sleep for all three of us.
Yeah, I for sure. I mean, I had a golden retriever. Her name was Birdie, and she passed a few years ago. But she would always sleep on a pillow above my head. That was her little
I
nest. I
understand.
call her
Yeah.
bird nest. So I'm not sure if your dog does that too, or if you allow that. She was like just the cutest dog, so I let her walk all over me. And she would
I
just
understand. I know how that goes. I'm just going to say that.
Can you share a story of a patient that has like changed their diet and it really helped with their symptoms? Any specifics that come to mind?
Well, yeah, there was a little golden retriever puppy. I guess we're on the golden topic, but let me be clear. Goldens are very commonly affected by allergies, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, they're very commonly affected by cancer as they age. But Abby, this was when I was in active daily practice here in San Luis Obispo, California, and she came in and she had just simply scratched her face and her ears to the point where they were just raw. There was
Mhm.
bleeding coming from one ear, and she'd lost all the hair around her eyes and around her ears. And to make a long story short, we did. We used a blood test to diagnose her, and she was allergic to chicken.
Mhm.
And just simply by eliminating chicken from her diet, and the parents actually chose to go with a home cooked diet that completely avoided chicken. Within about 2 months, she was back to absolute normal with only a very short course of initial drugs. And she lived happily ever after on that diet, avoiding chicken. And so, I pick on chicken a little bit, but actually the most common source of dietary allergens are red meats like beef or bison. Statistically, more dogs are allergic to red meats than any other form of protein on the market.
Interesting. Yeah. I've I've dealt with chicken more because I've always had golden retrievers growing up.
Hmm.
So chicken
Hmm.
is kind of hit or miss sometimes with the Goldens. And if I see
Hmm.
something, if I just like take out chicken for a while, they do great. So I
Yeah.
think maybe there's a little correlation between Goldens and chickens that I'm not sure why.
Well, I feed my little, I mentioned earlier that I home cook for my little puppy Annabelle. I'm lucky enough to go to farmers markets on a fairly regular basis. And so I buy a lot of different vegetables, and we use chicken as a primary meat for her. And one of the things that I would mention is that every meal that I give her contains broccoli, because one of the health benefits of broccoli is that it contains an ingredient, natural compound called sulforaphanes. And what that means to you and me is that they're anti-cancer agents. And
Um,
so every meal that she eats has broccoli, because I'm hoping to diminish the chances of cancer longer term for her. Now, as she goes through her life, I'll add in prescription longevity drugs like rapamycin, et cetera, that also help to fight cancer. But right now, as a young puppy, I'm taking the most natural approach possible.
I'm glad I ate broccoli for lunch today. So
Yep, yep, there you go. Had a
anti-cancer
girl.
right there.
It was mitigating some of those mosquito bites for you.
Yeah, I know. Mosquitoes are so attracted to me. So I'm just like, every time now I see, I'm like, you're just gonna shorten my life by 3 seconds right there. And I know you mentioned prescription drugs. Like, what are some of the
Mhm.
prescription drugs that you use in your practice to long prolong their life? I'm interested in hearing about that.
Well, there are really three different drugs. There's rapamycin, there's metformin, and there's acarbose. So let me speak in particular about rapamycin. It actually started in human medicine as kind of an antifungal, and then an immune suppressant medication. So that if I were to give you my kidney as part of a surgical procedure, you'd have to take an immune suppressant like rapamycin to prevent your body from rejecting it. But one of the things that science has told us over the last decade or so is that rapamycin has been proven in every mammal species studied to date, Jen, to increase lifespan by up to about 14%.
Wow,
And
that's a lot.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And the way it does this is by two different mechanisms. First, it minimizes cancer. And second, it reduces our old friend, inflammation as well. Rapamycin is probably the most commonly used prescription longevity drug for both humans and certainly in my practice as well. And then the other drug that I would mention is a drug called acarbose, and it's known by Precoce on the human market, but it has been extensively studied as well. And here's one thing that's interesting: in males of the species, if you use it alongside rapamycin, it'll add another 5 to 6% of lifespan just by taking that pill. And unfortunately, it doesn't extend to females, and I don't have an explanation for that. Neither does we just don't know at this point. But the combination of the prescription longevity drugs, rapamycin and acarbose, can extend a mammal's life by up to 20%, especially for males. And that's nothing to sneeze at. That's over a year or two for many of our pets.
Yeah, definitely. And are there any side effects that you've seen from these drugs?
Generally not at the low doses that we're using. Human side, initially at higher doses, they found that rapamycin sometimes created diabetes, but at the low levels that we're using, we just haven't seen those problems. Now, if Pepper were a diabetic and we chose to start her on rapamycin, you and I would draw her blood a couple of different times after she'd been on rapamycin for a couple of weeks or a month, just to make sure that we weren't running into any problems. But the reality is that these days we think rapamycin is absolutely safe. And let me mention one other thing about that, and that is that kitties, and I look at the banner behind you, and it clearly says dog mom. But the reality is that cats are 1 out of 6 cats will be affected by a heart disease called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And for 38 years, Jen, every time I said your cat has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, it was a death sentence for those cats. And now we know that this very same drug, rapamycin, that has been proven to extend lifespan by up to 14% in every mammal, can slow or sometimes even stop the progression of this fatal cardiac disease in cats. And so at this point, I'm sending rapamycin to more cat parents than I am dog parents. And we're seeing some pretty remarkable things in their kitties with heart problems.
Wow, super interesting. Yeah, I mean, I only have dogs because I'm just not really a cat person. I don't want to admit it, but I just don't understand them as much. But we do have a lot
Yeah.
of employees that have cats, multiple cats. We have a wall upstairs with all the employees' pets, and cats are like half of the
There
wall.
you go. Okay.
Kitties are definitely a part of our life here. And this is super interesting. And what is kind of like another piece of research or something that's coming onto the market that you've been seeing really good results from? Can you share?
Well, one of the things that I would mention is that, and again, I speak as somebody, I've been in veterinary clinics for 40 years, and I sold glucosamine and chondroitin products for dogs or for cats with joint problems. And I actually took it for myself because I played a lot of basketball at one point in my life, and so I have the knees to prove that. But there's increasing evidence, Jen, that the glucosamine and chondroitin products that are on the market do not work in either humans or in pets. And there are now conclusive studies that show there are 3 or 4 other products that are much more beneficial if you're running into arthritis, or for Kramer or for Pepper's arthritis. The reality is that there are now products that are proven much more effective than the glucosamine and chondroitin products that you can find on every aisle of every Costco and PetSmart in the world.
That's interesting because I would have said, 5 or 10 years ago that they don't work because I've used it for my older pets and I just don't see a difference. But I never knew if that was like the case with my dogs specifically. But
I think you're right. I think, yeah, I mean, I think
maybe I'm a scientist. I don't know.
Well, but there are things that we do know can benefit pets with arthritis or humans with arthritis. One of the things is simple fish oil. You spoke about that a little bit earlier, but in particular, there's a big, long natural supplements called undenatured type 2 collagen, or UC2. And that's been proven as effective in reducing human joint pain as a lot of the non-steroidal pain relievers. I mean, that's how effective it is. And it works every bit as well in dogs and cats. And so that really, when you ask for an example of a natural supplement that can benefit the quality of lives for our pets, or for that matter, our humans, the reality is undenatured type 2 collagen floats right to the top of that list.
Interesting. Yeah. And, other than fish oil and other things, like, what is kind of like, what do you suggest listeners and pet parents to invest in for their pet's longevity first? Maybe if they're thinking about investing or thinking of wanting to do an online consult with you, but they're not sure yet, what is something that they can kind of like dip their toes in and invest in first?
Well, first off, I'd love to visit with your clients on a consult basis, and I can talk more about that. But the
Mhm.
reality is that I guess what I would start with is knowledge for your
Mhm.
pet parents,
Yes.
because as you've spoken about, every breed has their tendencies. Every breed has kind of a chink in their armor. And for the Goldens that you and I love, unfortunately, it's cancer. But the reality is that the small breeds are more prone to heart problems. They're more prone to dental disease. Certain breeds of dogs are more prone to skin problems, like Shar-Peis, and, boxers are prone to heart and cancer issues. And so every breed has their risk factors, Jen, and that's
Mhm.
the first thing to understand.
Right.
The second thing I would say is that we have to know instead of guess about our pet's health. And so that's where your local veterinarian can really help you by doing, traditional veterinarians. They may take x-rays, or they may do some of the less comprehensive blood tests like we talked about. But it's important to get an understanding as to where your pet's health is currently. And then we can use that knowledge to really set a baseline for those pets, to develop a lifestyle plan, a diet plan, a supplement, a prescription longevity drug plan to really maximize their lifespan longer term. But it all starts with the knowledge of pet parents. And, I have all kinds of different papers on my website, but the reality is that these days with PubMed and with chat GPT, AI sources, there are plenty of different sources of information out there. And sometimes the question is not so much getting that information, but weeding through all the information you can find to really develop a plan. And that's what I try to do for the pet parents in my care.
Right, if you don't have time to weed through all the all the
Yeah,
scientific studies and seeing their
exactly.
method, right? Because just because
Yeah,
it's published doesn't necessarily mean that, it was done in the right, correct way to
right.
and
Not all studies are created equally, for sure. You're
yes.
exactly right.
Yes, yeah, my dog Birdie, as I said, she had, a congenital, kidney, disease, so my husband was, her caregiver, and he weeded through so many studies and so many things online, so it was definitely, a huge undertaking for him, so I'm sure some pet parents are going through that right now, right? Seeing,
Yeah.
what they can do to help their dog. Um and so over your 40 years of veterinary practice, what is like maybe one belief that you've held previously, but now you've kind of changed or it's changed your views? I'm interested.
Well, I can tell you very clearly, there are a number of different things, but the first thing I would think of is this, Jen. When I graduated from veterinary school back in 1986, we had zero courses in dental health. There was not one course in dentistry in veterinary school back in those days. And beginning in the 1990s, then especially in the early 2000s, we realized how many dogs, how many cats were in chronic pain because of dental infections, tooth root infections. And so, it makes me sad to recognize all the pets with chronic toothaches or horrible jaw pain, sometimes even cancer that lived undetected because we just didn't simply have the knowledge or the tools to be able to address that. And now we do. And so there are studies in human medicine that say periodontal disease, just really severe tooth root infections, can reduce human lifespan by up to 15%. And we
Mhm.
think the same thing is true in dogs and cats. And so now, again, it's not so much a large breed dog problem, but especially for small and medium sized dogs, if you have a middle aged dog, please take your dog to your veterinarian, have an anesthetic dental performed so that your veterinarian can take x-rays of every tooth in your dog's body, because the worst thing in the world is to have a toothache day in and day out, and your veterinarian can solve that.
Yeah, and sometimes you can't tell with a dog if their teeth are hurting. I feel like dogs
Right.
have a high tolerance of pain, and sometimes they just don't even tell you that they're in pain.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Kevin, for this really informative interview. Thank you so much for your time. And if my listeners want to, learn more about you or schedule an online consultation with you, where can they find you?
My website is www.helpingpetslivelonger.com, because that's exactly what I try to do 7 days a week. And there they will find much more information on consults, but simply the things that we've spoken about, Jen. I have a bunch of different papers on lifestyle and diet and prescription longevity drugs and supplements that your pet owners or your pet parents can use to help keep their pets healthy. But if I can help them in the form of a consult, I would be honored to do that.
Thank you so much for the amazing conversation. I feel like I need to have you back because I have more questions for you. I'm probably going to think of more questions when I'm editing the video as well. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Jen. I would be honored to come back and visit with you again. Have a great day.
Thank you.